The honey sitting in your pantry right now has had the life processed out of it, heated, spun, ultra-filtered, and stripped of the very enzymes that made it medicine for 10,000 years. Meanwhile, somewhere in the mountains of western North Carolina, an old man named Ebb Barnette is still keeping bees the way his grandmother did, in hollow logs pulled from the forest and producing honey that bears almost no resemblance to what you bought at the grocery store. Picture Appalachian, North Carolina in the 1880s. The ridgelines are still thick with old-growth hardwood. The nearest doctor is a 2-day ride. Sugar doesn't grow at 4,000 feet of elevation, and refined cane sugar at the general store costs money that most mountain families simply do not have. But there's a woman in the yard. She's standing at the edge of the homestead in front of a row of what look like short, thick sections of tree trunk propped on flat stones. She's calm. Her hands are bare. She lifts a board from the top of one of those log sections, and the sound that comes out, that low, deep, resonant hum, is the sound of 10,000 bees working. She reaches in without a flinch, finds the upper comb, cuts it free, and walks back into the house, carrying more pure, raw, enzyme-rich honey than you could buy for $40 at a farmer's market today. She does this every year. She has done this her entire life. She learned it from her mother, who learned it from hers. What she had and what you don't was a bee gum. So here's my question for you before we go further. Have you ever bought honey that you thought was doing something for your health and quietly wondered if it was actually doing anything at all? Drop that in the comments, because what you're about to discover will change how you see every jar of honey you've ever purchased, and why the golden thing sitting in your pantry is not the same substance those mountain women use to heal wounds, kill infections, and keep their families alive through brutal winters. Let's talk about what's in your honey jar. Go pick it up. Look at it. It's perfectly clear, perfectly smooth, perfectly uniform. It won't crystallize for months or maybe years because it's been heated to somewhere between 149 and 185 degrees Fahrenheit, then ultra-filtered under pressure to remove every trace of pollen, propolis, and wax particle. That process gives it a long shelf life and a beautiful, marketable appearance. It also destroys the enzyme glucose oxidase, the biological engine that generates honey's natural hydrogen peroxide and gives it antimicrobial power. Invertase activity, the enzyme that drives digestion and nutrient absorption, can be reduced by roughly 75% through commercial processing. The propolis particles that belonged in there, with documented anti-inflammatory, antiviral, and antibacterial properties, are gone. The pollen that would tell you exactly which flowers those bees visited, which region produced this honey, and what botanical compounds are in the jar, gone. What's left is primarily sugar water, fructose, glucose, water. It tastes like honey. It looks like honey. But it is not doing what honey was always supposed to do. Compare that to what came out of a bee gum. Comb was cut free, placed in a cloth, and allowed to drain at room temperature. Sometimes it was crushed and strained. That's the entire process. No heat, no centrifuge, no industrial filtration. The enzymes were intact. The propolis was in there. The pollen was in there. The antioxidants, which one comparative study found at up to 4.3 times higher levels in raw honey than in processed commercial honey, were in there. The honey you got from a mountain bee gum was as biologically complete as anything those bees ever produced. And those mountain women knew it. They weren't using it as a sweetener. They were using it as a pharmacy. Here's where it gets worse. The commercial honey industry doesn't even want you to know what you're missing, because if you understood the difference between what they're selling and what honey actually is, you'd never buy supermarket honey again. This isn't a personal failing. You didn't make a mistake. You bought what was available, what was marketed, what everyone around you accepted as normal. The system replaced the complete thing with a hollow replica, and then it never told you, you're not broken. You were handed broken instructions. Let's go deeper, because this story deserves it. Layer 1, the tree itself. The bee gum gets its name from the black gum tree, Nyssa sylvatica, also called black tupelo, sour gum, or peeperage. Despite the name, this tree produces no gum or resin whatsoever. It's called the gum tree to distinguish it from the sweet gum, which does. What makes it extraordinary for beekeeping is a biological accident. The black gum is susceptible to a heartwood decay fungus that enters from the top of the tree and works downward, carving the interior hollow while leaving the outer wood dense and intact. The wood itself has one of the most interlocked grain structures of any American hardwood. It physically cannot be split with an axe. These trees can live over 650 years and reach diameters of nearly 3 feet. The southern Appalachian Mountains were full of them. The result was a forest full of ready-made, predator-resistant, naturally insulated beehive chambers, just waiting to be cut to length and stood on a flat stone. Think of the black gum tree as nature's Langstroth hive. It spent decades doing exactly what beekeepers do today, engineering the interior of a dark, dry, ventilated cavity at the right temperature for a honeybee colony. And mountain settlers recognized this immediately. Layer 2, how the system actually worked. A bee gum was typically cut to roughly 2 to 3 feet in height. The inside was smoothed by burning and scraping. Families did this over the open fire in winter as a routine chore. 4 holes were drilled around the middle and wooden dowels threaded through in a crisscross pattern. This was the key innovation, simple as it sounds. Bees build their comb from the top down. The queen lays her eggs in the lower portion of the comb. The workers store honey in the upper portion. Those cross sticks acted as an anchor point. The bees suspended their comb from them. When harvest time came, a beekeeper could cut the comb above the cross sticks and take the honey-heavy upper section while leaving the brood comb below completely intact. The colony wasn't destroyed. It wintered over. It produced again the following year. This is not primitive beekeeping. This is functional systems thinking with whatever the mountain offered, and they didn't just keep bees. They found them. Mountain beekeepers used a technique called beelining. A hunter would locate foraging bees at a water source, feed them scented sugar water to slow them down, mark individual bees with paint, and watch the precise compass bearing. They flew when they left. That straight-line trajectory back to the colony is the literal origin of the phrase, make a beeline. By timing how long the marked bees took to return, Cornell professor Tom Seeley's modern research shows a 4-minute round trip indicates roughly 300 yards. Hunters could estimate distance. They'd move their bait station and repeat. Triangulating from multiple positions, they could locate a wild colony in a hollow tree with startling accuracy. Ebb Barnette of the Brushy Mountain community in Wilkes County, North Carolina, still keeping traditional bee gums as of his documentation in 2012, once found 86 bee trees in a single week. If you're finding this valuable, hit that like button right now. We're just getting started. Layer 3. The medicine chest. Appalachian folk medicine was a synthesis of Scots-Irish, German, English, Native American, and African American healing traditions. In communities where a doctor was a 2-day ride and professional medicine was prohibitively expensive, the mountain women who served as healers, called granny women and yarb doctors, built their practice around what the land provided. Honey sat at the center. Every herbal remedy went better with honey. Ginger tea, sassafras, elderberry, spicewood, pine needle, all were sweetened with honey from the bee gum, and not just for palatability. Golden seal mixed with honey treated severe chest infections and what they called pneumonia. A honey and onion preparation was used to fend off illness at the first sign of cold, and honey alone on wounds, burns, and infected skin was applied without hesitation. Honey was used in wartime to heal wounds, an effective treatment. As it turns out, that's from the documented record of Appalachian healing traditions. They were using it on battlefield injuries long before modern medicine caught up. Here's the part that should make you genuinely angry. Science has now confirmed that those mountain women were right. A 2023 comprehensive review published in the journal Nutrients, analyzing 48 clinical trials involving over 3,600 subjects, found significant beneficial effects of honey on wound healing, cardiovascular and metabolic markers, cough in children, and inflammation from chemotherapy-related mucositis. The World Health Organization now lists honey as a potential treatment for children's coughs. Medical-grade honey products are FDA approved for clinical wound care. The pharmaceutical industry spent decades developing synthetic antiseptics and antibiotic ointments, selling them at massive profit margins, while the empirical knowledge of those mountain women, knowledge documented in oral histories, in WPA narratives, in the pages of Foxfire, was dismissed as backward folklore. Those granny women weren't practicing folk magic. They were practicing evidence-based medicine before the phrase existed. Layer 4, the raw honey advantage. The bees themselves do extraordinary chemical work before honey ever leaves the comb. Worker bees add glucose oxidase from their hypopharyngeal glands as they process nectar. This enzyme, when honey is diluted by body fluids or wound moisture, generates a sustained, slow release of hydrogen peroxide. Not enough to damage tissue, exactly enough to kill bacteria. The honey's pH of 3.2 to 4.5 creates an acid environment hostile to infection. Its water content is so low, a water activity between 0.56 and 0.62, that bacteria are dehydrated on contact. Think of it as a three-front attack: acid, dehydration, and chemical oxidation hitting simultaneously. No bacteria alive has managed to develop resistance to that combination. This is why honey found in 3,000-year-old Egyptian tombs was still microbiologically sound, unspoiled, edible, after 3 millennia. Commercial pasteurization doesn't destroy all of this, but it wounds it badly. Glucose oxidase is heat-sensitive. Process honey at 185 degrees Fahrenheit, and that enzyme is functionally destroyed. The three-front attack becomes a one-front attack. The medicine becomes mostly sugar. So why did we abandon what worked? 3 reasons. And they all come back to the same calculation. Speed was the first reason. Bee gums couldn't be scaled. A single family might keep a dozen. Langstroth hives with movable frames and stackable honey supers could be stacked, expanded, and operated in professional apiaries of hundreds or thousands of colonies. One man with a Langstroth extractor could process what would have taken a week of crush and strain work. Cost was the second, after Amos Ives Root founded his manufacturing company in Medina, Ohio, in 1869, and began shipping standardized Langstroth equipment by railroad at industrial volume. The price per unit dropped until bee gums simply couldn't compete economically with mass-produced wooden boxes. At peak production, Root's operation was shipping 4 railroad cars of beekeeping supplies per day. Disease was the third, and the one that sealed the coffin. American foul brood had been destroying bee colonies since the colonial era, but as long as beekeeping was subsistence scale and dispersed, it never became a crisis. When commercial beekeeping began concentrating colonies, foul brood could devastate entire operations. The only way to detect it early is to inspect the brood comb. A bee gum's comb is fixed permanently to the walls and cannot be removed for inspection. State legislatures across the South began requiring movable frame hives by law, making bee gums effectively illegal in most jurisdictions by the early 20th century. Not because they didn't work, because the industrial model needed something it could inspect, regulate, and standardize. And then, in 1984, tracheal mites arrived in the United States. 3 years later, the varroa mites followed. The wild feral bee colonies that had supplied mountain beekeepers with freebies for generations, the bee trees that families spent generations learning to find, were devastated within a decade. The supply chain for the bee gum system collapsed. The gums sat empty. Within 2 generations, most mountain families had never seen one. The problem you have today, paying premium prices for honey that has been heat-treated into a nutritional shadow of itself, taking supplements that can't replicate what the bee gum produced for free, watching a food that was once a household medicine cabinet become a commodity input, is not your failure. It is the direct consequence of a system that chose speed, regulation, and industrial scalability over everything that made the original thing worth having. Now here's what you can actually do about it. The easiest option, find real raw honey from a local beekeeper and read the label with your eyes open. You want a jar that says raw and unfiltered, not just pure or natural, which are marketing words with no legal standard. Raw, unfiltered honey from a local source will be cloudy. It will have visible particles. It will granulate within weeks or months, which is a sign of high pollen content and minimal processing, not a sign of spoilage. Crystallized honey is more chemically stable than liquid honey. If it's clear as water and been sitting on a shelf for a year without granulating, it has been processed. Farmers markets, local beekeeping clubs, and state agricultural cooperative directories are your best sources. Ask the beekeeper directly, do you heat it? Do you filter it? Those two questions separate real honey from commercial honey instantly. The intermediate option, if you want to go further, is to find a local beekeeper who keeps top bar hives or waré hives, styles that produce comb honey by crush and strain rather than centrifuge extraction, closely replicating the bee gum method, or find beekeepers selling cut comb honey. Literal sections of honeycomb sealed in a jar. That is as close to bee gum honey as you can get in the modern world. You can eat the wax. It's beeswax. It has been sealing things and treating things and keeping things safe for as long as bees have existed. The minimum option, if you do nothing else, perform the crystallization test. Take your current honey jar and put it in the refrigerator for 2 weeks. If it granulates, goes thick, grainy, opaque, it still has enough intact pollen and natural sugars to behave like real honey. Warm it gently in a bowl of warm water to reliquefy it. If it stays perfectly clear and liquid regardless of refrigeration, it has been filtered and likely pasteurized. That's the minimum test. That's information you can act on right now, today, with what's in your pantry. Ebb Barnette of Brushy Mountain, North Carolina, is the last of a tradition that kept Appalachian families fed, healed, and sweetened for 2 centuries. The women who stood at those rows of hollow logs, barehanded, unhurried, reading their bees the way you read a familiar face, were not practicing something primitive. They were practicing something complete, an integrated system grown directly from their landscape, refined across generations, producing medicine and food and light and waterproofing and thread wax and leather conditioner from a single creature, housed in a single log, cut from a tree that grew hollow on purpose. The knowledge wasn't lost. It was outlawed, displaced and forgotten in a single century. We're here to dig it back up. Appalachian foodways, mountain medicine, the forgotten systems that worked before the products replaced them. Tell us in the comments, what piece of old knowledge do you want us to investigate next? And if this is the kind of thing you've been looking for, subscribe and stay with us. There is so much more buried up here on these ridgelines. We're just getting started.